Well, kia ora tātou, good afternoon everyone. Can I say thanks for coming here today, and can I just say thank you to MB for hosting us, and can I also acknowledge the MB staff that worked on this program of really complex work, and to say thank you very much for your contributions as well. As you can see, I'm here with our great Building and Construction Minister, Chris Penk, to tell you about proposed changes for assessing the seismic risk of buildings across New Zealand. Nicola is also with us as a Wellington-based MP, and obviously with a very keen interest in the implication of the proposed changes. It seemed appropriate to include a flavour of Wellington in this announcement that will benefit this city and many other places across New Zealand. It's great to be here on a fantastic day. But this is a day, frankly, that a number of people, especially here in the capital, have lain awake at night hoping that common sense would prevail on this issue, and that's exactly what we're doing today. First, just a little bit of history. Following the Canterbury Earthquakes Royal Commission, a single nationwide approach was developed for identifying earthquake-prone buildings and then managing them. That system provides a relative assessment of the seismic risk of an existing building compared to that of an equivalent new building. And if the existing building is assessed as being likely to perform at less than 34% of a new one, the existing building must either be strengthened or demolished within a certain time frame, depending on where it is. Now, the impact of this approach is that more than 8,000 buildings, many of which were bought by the owners as compliant with earthquake rules, are now classified as earthquake prone, which resulting in sometimes staggering financial implications for the building's owners. This includes older style apartment blocks here in Wellington, to which some people have retired to before the earthquake. Some had carefully calculated that their retirement nest egg would see them through the rest of their lives, living modestly here in the capital. And then suddenly they discovered that the rules had changed, and that they and other apartment owners in their block were each going to be liable for a bill of hundreds of thousands of dollars to have their building strengthened or re-strengthened to a new code. And obviously the problem has not just affected only retired people. Others have been unable to move on in their lives because they're stuck with properties where the value was largely wiped out when the earthquake-prone building system was introduced. As the Minister is about to tell you, a review of the current rules finds that there are owners with bills of millions of dollars to comply with the new rules, and for many those bills are simply unaffordable, and some make remediation uneconomic. Meanwhile, parts of the country with a low seismic risk are also impacted. Councils everywhere are burdened. A swathe of buildings such as town halls and churches stand empty and decaying and derelict, and a system that was designed, albeit with very good intentions, is failing New Zealand. Our approach is that this government and this minister, who is regularly delivering, I think, very common sense reforms to the building sector, says that there's a balance required between public safety and common sense. I agree, and I think New Zealanders will too. Ours is a seismically active country. Reducing life safety risk in existing buildings over time will always remain the primary objective of the system. We're not absolving every building owner of every responsibility, because that would be going too far the other way. Instead, we are creating a more proportionate risk-based approach, and mitigation will be required only in buildings with the highest risk in the event of an earthquake. I'll hand over now to Minister Penk to outline the proposed changes in detail, and we'll come back and take your questions around the announcement. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Prime Minister. Kia ora, good afternoon. As the PM has rightly laid out, the current system for assessing and managing seismic risk in buildings, while well-intentioned, has placed an overwhelming financial burden on building owners. To find a better way forward, the government initiated a review of the earthquake-prone building system last year. The review was led by MB with oversight from a steering group chaired independently. It drew on independent research, modelling, cost-benefit analysis, sector focus groups and public submissions. The review found that while some parts of the system are functioning, significant issues are delaying progress. The problems identified include that remediation can be disruptive, unaffordable for owners, or simply uneconomic. Some buildings have been vacated or strengthened well beyond what their risk justifies. Buildings never intended to be caught are being swept up in the system. Enforcing remediation obligations is costly and time-consuming for councils, and heritage restrictions are creating barriers to practical solutions. As a result, remediating or demolishing 5,800 earthquake-prone buildings on the register has proven far more challenging than ever imagined. The review recommended what has always been clear to this government, that reducing life safety risk should remain the primary objective of the system. But it also finds that the costs must be kept proportionate to the consequences of building failure, so that it is realistic for owners to meet their obligations. The government is committed to ensuring that New Zealanders can get on with the work that matters, so that our businesses, regional communities and cities can thrive. Today I'm announcing the move to a fairer, risk-based system that will bring real relief to building owners, while continuing to keep Kiwis safe. This refocused system is expected to save New Zealanders more than $8.2 billion in remediation and demolition costs. To achieve this, the government is removing the use of the New Building Standard, or NBS ratings, that engineers currently use to determine whether a property is earthquake prone. This method is not an exact science, and in practice it is proven too broad and inconsistent. Because a building's overall NBS rating is determined by its weakest part, even a small defect can see an entire building classified as earthquake prone. The new system will instead capture only buildings that pose a genuine risk to human life in medium and high risk seismic zones. This category includes concrete buildings 3 stories or higher, and buildings constructed primarily of unreinforced masonry. In recognition of the different seismic hazard levels across New Zealand, Auckland, Northland and the Chatham Islands will be removed from the regime entirely. There is considerably less need to spend significant amounts of money on strengthening in regions with very low seismic risk. To put the cost in context, Auckland alone is expected to save $4.5 billion. Unreinforced masonry buildings under 3 stories in small and rural towns, meanwhile, will also no longer require remediation or warning notices. However, owners must secure the facade before these buildings can be removed from the earthquake-prone register. This recognises that the risk of a facade falling onto a pedestrian is lower in communities with fewer than 10,000 residents than it is in urban large centres, simply because there are fewer people on the street. The difference that this will make for our communities in the regional and rural New Zealand cannot be overstated. In Dannevirke, for example, with a population of just 5,600, the savings are estimated at around $68 million. Morrinsville, which falls under the population cap as well, stands to save about $50 million. For buildings that still require remediation, the government will remove the rule that the building owner must also upgrade fire safety and disability access at the same time as earthquake strengthening. This requirement has added cost, discouraging owners from undertaking essential seismic work. We will also consider further regulatory relief, including changes to resource management and heritage rules. Finally, local councils will also be able to grant extensions to remediation deadlines of up to 15 years, giving building owners more time to secure funding, plan for and carry out major works where needed. Taken together, these changes will remove around 55% of current earthquake-prone buildings, or around 2,900 buildings, from the system. A further 1,440 buildings will face more cost-effective remediation requirements, and 840 will require no remedial work at all. Only about 80 buildings will still need a full retrofit because of the risk that they continue to pose. This is a system that keeps safety at its heart, but does so in a way that is proportionate, practical and achievable. It will reduce unnecessary costs, give owners and communities greater certainty, and allow our towns and cities to thrive. I pass now to our colleague and friend, Honourable Nicola Willis.
Well, can I just first acknowledge the Minister for his careful, considerate and very pragmatic approach to this issue. Since I've become an MP based here in Wellington, this is one of the issues that has led to the most emotional pleas to my office from people who've been beset by the vagaries of a regime that has seemed at times to be unjust, unwieldy and very far from common sense. The changes that Minister Penk has announced today will roughly halve the number of buildings in Wellington that will continue to be classified as earthquake prone, removing around 270 buildings currently classified that way from the register. It will also reduce the estimated costs of remediation. MB estimate that the savings are about $1 billion in Wellington's case. That's $1 billion that instead of being spent on the wrong thing will now be freed up for investments in genuinely growth-enhancing infrastructure, growth-enhancing property development, or whatever it is that a family or a homeowner deems may be more important. So this is a policy that is pragmatic, that will alleviate the woes of many, particularly here in my home city, and will also release funds for more productive use and for economic growth.
Great. Well, listen, everybody, can I just suggest, why don't we do questions around the announcement first and foremost, and then we'll get to general questions of the day after that, if that's okay. With that, have a take your questions.
Auckland seems to be one of the big winners here by removing buildings in the low seismic zone from the system. Why were those buildings in the system in the first place? Was that the wrong decision back in 2016? And what's changed since then to give you the confidence to remove them now?
Yeah, the current regime was brought in 2017 with good faith intentions to protect life safety risk. However, the experience has proven that a lot of the intended work under that system has proven uneconomic and difficult to achieve in a practical sense. So in terms of Auckland and also Northland and the Chatham Islands, we're able to look at the scientifically derived seismic map of New Zealand and determine that with lower risk associated with those areas, not zero risk, but lower risk, it makes sense in a proportionate balanced sense to remove those now from the regime.
Do you have any...
David Seymour says that old policy cost people lives because money and focus was put on that and lower risk buildings rather than the higher risk stuff. Would you agree with that?
Well, certainly our emphasis has been to focus on the most dangerous buildings now, and of course preserving life safety at the heart of the system is our intention. So going forward, we're really comfortable that it will be the most high-risk buildings and the most high-risk aspects of those buildings that will be remediated.
Do you think that old policy cost lives?
It's difficult to know, hypothetically, what may have happened in the intervening time in a different scenario, but what we can control is that here in 2025 we brought forward a review that was due to have taken place at the 10-year mark. We've had that conducted by MB, but with an independent chair and expert steering group providing lots of different relevant perspectives, and so we're really comfortable that we've landed in a good place.
Do you have any sense about how
the average person at home will be going, gosh, 55% of buildings dropping off that list, that's a lot, and be worried about their safety? What is your response to that?
Yeah, there are lots of reasons that buildings might have been able to be remediated in the meantime, and of course going forward there's nothing to stop a building owner from remediating a building, notwithstanding the earthquake-prone building regime imposed by government might not require that. That might be around a desire in terms of life safety for their own sake. It might go to insurance, it might go to tenantability of the building, but we think that it's really clear from the expert evidence that we've gathered across a broad range of informed and also general public stakeholders that we've struck a right balance. And also we think that removing some buildings that aren't posing a significant risk relative to others is the right way to ensure that the resources of the system, both public and private, can be directed where they're most genuinely needed.
And sorry, the only thing I'd add into it is that the number of people that I've spoken to up and down the country that may have moved into an apartment that then have been hit with huge liability, or huge contingents that they have to sort of find funding for to strengthen that building. That's caused huge anxiety for a number of people and actually really changed the way they're living their life, really. And the same for small business owners up and down the country. I'm thinking of many different small provincial towns that have been caught up with this legislation, had buildings caught up in it that didn't need to be caught up in it. And of course what we're saying is that's freeing up essentially $8 billion that can be redeployed into the economy as those developers and those building owners actually do manage the real targeted risk and serious high risk that we have. We deal with that issue, but actually then that capital is freed up to be deployed to advance other developments as well. So I get the public safety is at the paramount and is at the heart of what we're doing here. But we're also saying, look, here we are, 8 years down the road, and it's quite right that we take a fresh look at it. It has been a broad review considering all perspectives from engineers, from property owners to the public, and actually I think we've got the balance right. But don't underestimate the huge amount of pain and suffering. There are many New Zealanders who have stretched into an apartment only to find body corporate fees going through the roof to do remediation, or small business owners as well.
There are a lot of people in...
that the New Zealanders aren't walking into unsafe buildings?
Yes, I do. I think a targeted approach about targeted risk and risk management is actually what's needed, because the danger is if it's one size fits all, you end up boiling the ocean and actually not doing and managing those risks actively. And so active risk management is what we're doing here. And I think Chris and the team have done a brilliant job just working their way through a very complex set of issues to actually make sure that we get that balance right between protecting people and the safety of lives, coupled with also making sure we free up capital, and that we've got perverse situations where people have left buildings vacant because the cost of remediation in Fielding or Martin or places like that up and down the country doesn't make sense, and as a result they just walk away from the building. The building's now vacant, derelict, and actually a bigger risk as a result of all of that. So, we've got to get the balance right, and I think we're doing that well.
On that notion of apartment owners,
Sorry?
of those apartment owners who have had a lot of stress over the last 8 years, what would you say to those of them who have actually undertaken work under the old system, who've gone into their savings, spent significant amounts of money? Do they deserve some kind of compensation, or is it just sorry the system wasn't?
I'll let Chris talk to that, because obviously we're conscious of that too.
Yeah, look, for those who have actually been able to spend the money and the time and the energy and the effort to improve their buildings, they've got a better result, both in terms of the physical structure itself, but in terms of insurance and tangibility. I don't think anyone should regret having invested in making their building more safe. The question is really going forward whether it's right to require others to do a thing that has proven beyond them economically, where that can't be justified in a proportional balance system.
So most of the affected apartment owners in Wellington are in concrete buildings taller than 3 stories, and those are still caught up in the system. So apart from removing the disability requirements and whatnot, how does this actually make anything better for them?
Yeah, there's various different categories of building that are able to be removed. In the case of those for whom we can't say honestly and fairly that there is a mitigatable risk beyond which we can say that they don't need to work, nevertheless there will be wins to the extent that we can have targeted retrofit as opposed to full retrofit, and then down a level again facade securing as opposed to full strengthening works. And then you've got in the category of others those which merely need to be recorded on a risk register, and that sort of almost by way of disclosure. And then for the other category, those that simply remain in the system, we are working on different measures to make it more easy, practical and affordable for those to undertake the work that they will still need to be able to do, including, as the Prime Minister referenced in his opening remarks, the effect of heritage rules and other related areas of law and policy that we know can actually help.
It's also the case that it does statistically reduce the number of buildings in Wellington classified as earthquake-prone, which is currently 540. The changes the Minister's announced bring that down to 269.
Would the changes you're announcing today, would that have captured like a CTV's type structure?
In short, yes.
Okay. The $8.2 billion figure doesn't seem to match up with the preferred option in the Cabinet paper. So where does that come from?
Yeah, the number of different options that were provided by MB's excellent group canvassed a range of different possibilities. Essentially, we've gone for what's known as option 3, which we think is the best of all worlds, except only that we've taken the additional step of removing the low-risk seismic zones in Auckland, Northland and Chatham Islands entirely, because we think that's justified on a proportionate basis.
So Coastal Otago, is also going to be moving from low risk to medium risk. What's going on there?
Yeah, we simply need seismic risk maps that update the latest scientific understanding of seismic risk, and that was a move independent of the fact of us convening an inquiry, such that that's been recategorised based on the knowledge that we have regarding fault lines and so on, from low, as you say, to medium.
Did you not follow the preferred advice, the third option from your officials on this?
We followed a combination of what's option 3, which is nominally the recommended approach, but also some of option 4 in relation to the low seismic risk zones.
Just a small point of clarification. Option 3 was talking about high traffic areas as well as emergency routes, but I think, does this final decision only include emergency routes?
We have an element of high traffic versus lower traffic, and the obvious implication is the statistical likelihood of death or injury in the case of unsecured masonry being differentiated across those two. We're accounting for that in relation to population centres of less than 10,000 or more than 10,000, and that will go to the question of whether facade securing only or the risk register requirement would exist in those relatively small towns.
There was an issue raised in the report that, like in Wellington, basically every earthquake-prone building was in a high-traffic area because almost all streets were. So I'm just trying to. So did you end up not going with that advice and just looking at emergency priority routes?
Yeah, we don't have the same high-risk areas designated as what we call priority zones in the same way. It was a system designed in good faith to take into account the nuance of different pedestrian levels at certain times of day. So even then, it's a difficult measure to agree upon. That was a role that was given to local government. It just proved really difficult for them to determine with some certainty how those maps should look, basically. So we're going again with a clearer and more straightforward, simple approach.
What impact will this have on the government in terms of public offices, schools, those sorts of things?
Yeah, this announcement and policy is a big win for central government, but also local government. And I'll just pause on local government to acknowledge that with councils having to be the enforcer of the regulations, but also oftentimes owners of earthquake-prone buildings themselves, it's been a subject of some discussion, and I'm really pleased to have many mayors and councillors quite pleased with the moves that we're making in this regard, and obviously, of course, in the private sector too. And in the case of central government buildings, that analysis will now be done on a building-by-building basis, and of course, the calculation will then be possible across the board, but certainly it will be really helpful to ensure that we target our resources in terms of the taxpayer funds that go into remediation work where it is most needed.
So is it not known how much of the 8.2 would be savings for central government?
Not at this stage.
Homeowners, for example, struggling to get loans from the bank, insurance for this. Do you expect that to change for them?
We think it'll be helpful for people for whose lenders and insurers point to the existence of the earthquake-prone building regime, and the stigma attached with a building considered to be earthquake-prone will be removed where that is the case, of course, under the new rules. That said, lenders and insurers and would-be tenants can make their own assessments, and in terms of the survivability of a building as opposed to the life safety risk to the human life within the building, that'll be a different calculation that businesses, but also public sector organisations, trusts and so on will make on their own calculations as a matter of good governance.
So you would talk to in your talk with insurers, do you expect premiums to come down at all? Did they give you any assurance that premiums might come down or not grow at the same rate at least?
I don't have any assurances that I can give directly on their behalf, but I know that a more proportionate system will put downward pressure on those premiums, and it might go to the excess levels as well, and also the willingness of them of those insurers and so on to provide coverage.
Given that it still might be hard then, are you open to creating another fund, providing money to existing earthquake owners that need more help still?
Yeah, that's not something we're committing to, and the reason is that we've conducted a review that we think lands in a good place in terms of removing a government requirement to remediate and lessening the requirement to remediate for buildings that are still caught, and also making it more economic to do so. And we'll continue to think about ways that we can make sure that's more affordable, but it's difficult to draw the line in terms of where government assistance should start and end in the case of private property.
For those people moving up, those people in coastal Otago moving up from a low risk level to a moderate risk level, what will that mean for them?
Well, they'll be no worse off under the new rules, because until now all zones, including low seismic risk zones, have been captured. So on an individual basis, obviously they'll need to consider whether they might be relieved from the regime, not on the basis of geography, but if they have fewer than 3 stories in terms of their height, or if their construction type is not either high risk concrete or unreinforced masonry, or they might merely require facade securing in a way that they didn't before. So there'll be wins even for those who remain within the medium and high risk zones, including coastal Otago.
But there might be more people who would be needing to put their building on the register?
There won't be any more under the new rules than the old. The move from a low risk zone to a medium zone coincides with us removing low risk entirely, but they would have been caught in any case, because under the current system, low risk zone is captured just as much as high and medium risk.
How will you ensure that local councils won't extend the deadline longer than what's needed for the level of risk?
Yeah, I mean the requirements are legislated, so they'll need to act in accordance with the law, but we are providing some discretion in cases where a particular organisation might find it difficult to meet the requirements within the current timeframes. We're allowing them discretion of up to 15 years on the basis, for example, it might be that good faith efforts have been made, but the funding isn't there for the full extent of the works, or it might be that the local resources in terms of the contracting to physically carry out the works aren't available, and so on that basis they'll be able to consider providing an extension. But we don't want to kick the can down the road. We actually want the buildings in New Zealand to be as safe as possible, as quickly as possible, and that of course is the whole intent of the regime, by focusing it where it's most needed.
You mentioned the Chatham Islands. How many earthquake-prone buildings are there on the Chatham Islands?
I don't know that number off the top of my head. We'll see if we can find that out.
Have you had any advice on the effectiveness of the 70C bridge? in Wellington?
I know that there are a number of local projects both here in Wellington and across New Zealand that are being watched very carefully, and I think I'm very much hoping that this announcement will be regarded as very timely in the case of those. I'm unwilling to get into specific details of specific buildings, not being an engineer and also not wanting to prejudge the assessment of those.
Do you anticipate that that developers will just not want to build with concrete anymore?
I think it's important to note that for buildings that are built new going forward, they will continue to have to comply with the seismic standards of the day. So today's announcement is about assuring those who have existing buildings that they won't be required to come up to a level that didn't exist at the time that they built it, if it was recent, or going back far enough only to the the extent that we're going to require. So certainly over time the seismic standards of our buildings will improve because there's a sinking lid in terms of the number of buildings that are caught by the regime. As new buildings, of course, replace those over time, we'll get safer as a country as a result.
Prime Minister, Chris Pink has done very well in the Mood of the Boardroom. You've praised his work on a number of times. When is he going to join the Cabinet?
Oh, well, he's doing an exceptionally good job, and I'm very, very proud of him, as I am all my ministers. And so I just want to make sure he's a great case in point. He's someone who's taking a very common sense approach to his portfolio, working through and removing obstacles and accelerating opportunities for New Zealanders, and he's doing a great job. So as I said before, I will do reshuffles when I feel they're appropriate, when I need to. But he's doing an exceptionally good job, as I've said many, many times before.
Prime Minister, why were MFAT officials not involved in preparing the cabinet paper for the decision on Palestine? Why was that mostly done at Winston Peters' office?
Sorry?
Largely, Winston Peters' office prepared the cabinet paper that had the options on Palestine and Gaza for you, rather than MFAT officials.
No, we had MFAT officials involved.
Yeah, so you weren't worried about leaks?
Sorry?
You weren't worried about leaks? That wasn't the reason?
No. We, as you know, we had a good conversation at FPS. We had a further conversation in Cabinet. And Winston Peters and I had a further conversation the day before he made the announcement as well. So, our decision is we had a preliminary conversation and decision in place that we're all very aligned around. And I think we got to the right decision for New Zealand.
Have you had any response from any of your international counterparts?
No.
Are you expecting anything? Do you think other countries really care about what New Zealand's made decision on?
Well, each country makes its own decision. Some of our friends in recent months have decided to recognise, and others of our friends have not. And they each make their own assessment. What is irrespective, and good people on all sides of this debate can come to different conclusions. But what is common between us and those parties that have recognised and those that haven't is that we are all very, very focused on stopping this conflict, and that is really the game that we really have to be focused on, irrespective of what your country decision on recognition may or may not be. And so for us, that's where my focus with leaders has been around is, right, how do we continue to get Hamas, put pressure on Hamas to release hostages? How do we make sure when Israel's had a grossly disproportionate response around military action, lack of protection of civilians, lack of not letting aid come into Gaza, and also illegal settlements on the West Bank? How do we, there is fault at both sides, and we need to be able to get to diplomacy, discussion, debate, a ceasefire to stop the humanitarian catastrophe that's unfolded there.
How much did Hamas play into your decision?
Well, Hamas is, let's be really clear about it, Hamas is a brutal terrorist organisation. It unleashed 1,200 people were massacred, innocent civilians at a music concert in Israel. 251 people were taken as hostages. There's 48 still that haven't been returned, of which there is an estimate that 20 are alive. So that is an, I'm the Prime Minister that decided to designate the whole of Hamas a terrorist organisation for very good reason. So Hamas has no future role in a Palestinian state, and must disarm, must disband, and we must have Palestinian leaders renounce any violence and terrorism in that region. Equally, as you've seen with 80 ministerial statements, constant partnering with our friends, those that have and those that haven't recognised the state of Palestine, we continue to call out Israel for its grossly disproportionate response. We have said consistently no military action in Gaza City. We've said unhindered aid into Gaza. The illegal settlements on the West Bank accelerating is something that has been a long-standing position of New Zealand as being illegal for a long period of time. So, we are not pro-Palestine or pro-Israel. We actually are friends to both. We have conversations with both the Palestinian Authority, which will continue to strengthen, so they have the governance and the institutions that they need to be able to take on the functioning of a state in due course, and we'll continue to call out Israel. But we are pro-peace, and that's really what I've been saying. That is really what we need to be focused on as a world.
Would you say countries that have decided to recognise Palestine are pro-Palestinian?
No, they've come to their own independent assessments of where they want to be on recognition issues. But equally, so have many of our other friends decided not to recognise at this point in time. We've said very clearly we will. It's a matter of when, not if. But for that to happen, two things would need to be evident. One, no future role for Hamas. You cannot recognise a state where a terrorist organisation is the de facto government of Gaza, which is a large proportion of the Palestinian state that would ultimately emerge. And equally, we are working with the Palestinian Authority and will continue to support the Palestinian Authority through our quartet and through other things to make sure they can build out the institutions, the governance that they need in order to be able to assume a responsibility of leading a Palestinian state in due course.
So Kiwis care a lot, or a lot of Kiwis care deeply about this. How concerned are you that this issue might drag into next year and be an election issue for you?
Well, there are Kiwis on all sides of it. There are Kiwis who believe that recognition is important. There are Kiwis equally who believe that recognition is not important. And there is a large number of Kiwis who don't have a view on it one way or another. What we have done is made an assessment, revisited our position, looked at it, checked it in a very cautious, very calm, very consistent kind of way, and I think arrived at the right position. New Zealand, this is a complex issue, but the bigger issue is in fact that today there are people, innocent civilians, who are going to die, and they've continued to be in this position for a long period of time, and irrespective of what happens with recognition, the problem still exists, and so you've got to focus everything on the problem that we've got. Now, we are a long way away from Israel. We have very little connectivity with Israel or the Middle East region in general, but we continue to advocate very strongly for Hamas to release hostages and Israel to meet its international obligations.
Is there any part of you that thinks you've fallen on the wrong side here? Is there any part of you that...
No, I think we worked our way through a very calm, considered, thoughtful assessment of our position. And we did so in an independent way. We've got friends, as I said, internationally that have recognised. Equally, we have friends that have not recognised. But we made our own decision and plotted our own course. And we will recognise Palestine. We just don't think that time is right now.
What would be the trigger for that?
Israel holds hundreds of Palestinian prisoners without charge. Have you ever called for them to be released to conditionally become?
Well, we continually call on Israel to meet its obligations. You've seen us leverage sanctions against ministers. You've seen us put sanctions against extremist settlers. You've seen us have export controls in place since 2003 about sale of anything to the IDF or anyone else. We've maintained that, and we continue to monitor that. And where we think there are things that we can call out further, we will continue to do so. But equally, Hamas orchestrated a massacre unforeseen in the history of Israel. 1,200 innocent people at a music festival were massacred. 251 people were taken as hostages. 48 still remain. If they tomorrow, they could release those hostages.
What would be the trigger for reconsidering?
Sorry?
What would be the trigger for reconsidering whether to recognise Palestine?
We're going to continue to monitor it. As I said, it's been a question. Our policy remains of when, not if. But the two things that we need to see is clearly no future role for Hamas, who are the de facto government of Gaza, a renunciation of terrorism and violence by Palestinian leaders across the region. And the second piece is we want to see more capacity building with the Palestinian Authority, and we will support them with that because we want them to be ready to be able to lead a Palestinian state in due course. But for that to happen, it requires a lot of capacity building, it requires a lot of understanding of how you would organise institutions and a whole range of things of the machinery of government that we need to start to orchestrate. So we will continue to, our position is unchanged, when not if. I appreciate their views on all sides of it, but I'm proud of the independent decision that New Zealand made and the way that we went through that assessment process, I think, in a very rigorous and a very robust way.
Would you challenge Israel to renounce some of the, quite intense military action they've taken on Gaza?
Well, we have. We've done that consistently. We've said to Israel before they entered Gaza City, do not enter Gaza City. what this conflict does not need is more military action. What it needs is actually leaders who are intransigent on both sides to actually get to a table to have diplomacy, discussion and debate and negotiation to be able to create the conditions for a ceasefire and ultimately the conditions for a two-party state. So we continue to advocate strongly with that with our friends as well. Thank you, team. Have a good day. See ya.